I'm Allison Kydd. I'm reading at Indian Head Library from my story Fidelity, which was published in Apart, the pandemic anthology. Fidelity. Veronica sits at the bay window in the living room most mornings. Sits until guilt or sheer boredom sends her off to accomplish some small task. Oh yes, she's keeping a list. Get dressed, brush hair, make bed, put away clothes, balance bank statement, water plants, try new recipe, sweep or vacuum, phone, X, Y, or Z, finish letter to M, practice standing warrior, shoulder rolls, downward facing dog. Not that she ever makes it to the end of the list, but she scribbles it out anyway. Otherwise, she might not bother getting out of bed. He has little to say about it, though she knows he worries. Once or twice he's asked if she's depressed, if that's why she's sleeping so much. Everyone is depressed, she says. It's the state of the world. How can anyone not be depressed? She knows she's overreacting, but she resents the question when obviously she's not the kind to give in, no matter what she's up against. She's always been able to lick her wounds and then get on with things. Or so she tells herself. And how dare he anyway? He used to compliment her willingness to fight any battle, like when she was being hooked up to that intravenous bag once a week. He'd watch as the needle went into her arm, would sit beside her, read for hours while the poison did its work. Almost 20 years ago now. Not that much drama in their lives anymore, especially not for the last year. He mustn't give up on her now. After all, she isn't lying when she says she's committed to him, and being committed means one can't afford to fail. Though it's okay for her to have doubts now and then, she knows she doesn't mean anything by them. He mustn't think he made another mistake. Nor can she let him know how dependent she really is. Not that he would leave her high and dry. Actually, he's not perfect either. He's one to be annoyed by small things. Lights left on, music too loud, blinds left open at night. People might see them from the street, as if anyone cared. Fortunately, such fussiness is a small sin. She doesn't want to imagine how distant he could be if he didn't love her anymore. The thought gives her an ache in her belly. She once had a run of other lovers, not that it matters. For almost 20 years, she seldom thought of them. If they've come to mind more frequently of late, it's because she has so much time on her hands. This wasn't a good year to quit her job, though she didn't feel she'd had a choice, when the desire was gone and she seldom even liked her students. Unfortunately, when she decided to retire, she had no way of predicting that the world would change within a few months. When thoughts of former lovers do come to mind, there's little sweetness in the memories, certainly not when she thinks of Kurt. Though there must have been something at the beginning, she's not a total masochist. It's hard to believe she tolerated the things Kurt did and said. Oh no, he wasn't abusive, not really, but he wasn't kind either. He simply refused to take her feelings into account if doing so would cramp his style. It sometimes seemed as if he set out to humiliate her. She remembers one Sunday afternoon when a group of them were having lunch at a friend's. They had ordered pizzas. Kurt, as always, was the center of attention. Before long, he was flirting with one of the other women, then followed the woman into the basement. Time went by, but neither emerged. Veronica tried to pretend she wasn't going out of her mind, while nobody else seemed to think it was peculiar. Was it possible he would bed another woman in the middle of the day while she, supposedly his girlfriend, his partner, was practically within earshot? This was a new level of cruelty. Or was it some kind of ploy to get rid of her? He had always been frank about not wanting a permanent relationship. She counted the minutes. 10 minutes. 20. What could they be doing? Why was it taking so long? What was she supposed to do? She stood up, collected her coat and purse, and headed for the kitchen door. This was noticed. What's happening? I think she's leaving. What's up? Shouldn't you tell Kurt? That was Sean, the fellow who had driven them to the gathering. At least he was speaking directly to her rather than about her. The expression on his face, what was it? Pity? Discomfort? Incredulity? She didn't know. You tell him, she blurted out. He's your friend. She couldn't say any more. The tears were threatening to flow. Sean had followed her to the kitchen. Look, Ronnie, he said, you've got to toughen up. Things aren't always as bad as they might seem. She shoved her feet into her boots and looked past him towards the living room. Thanks for the pizza and coffee, she hollered to the others, then bolted out into the cold. It wasn't the first time she'd stumbled down a sidewalk when blinded by tears, but Kurt had never been quite so blatant. It wasn't long before they caught up with her in the car. Sean was driving, of course, and Kurt scrunched up against Sean's girlfriend in the front seat. The third couple were in the back, but they weren't looking at her, thank heavens, probably too embarrassed. How had this suddenly become her fault? The car slowed. She slowed. The car stopped. She stopped. Get in! Kurt hissed from the car window, not opening the door. What right had he to be angry? She stayed where she was, not crying anymore, but with tracks of tears frozen on her cheeks. He got out finally and came over to her. She noticed he didn't have a coat. What are you trying to prove? He said. What am I trying to prove? What about you? Listen, it's bloody cold out here. Get in the car. She turned and headed in the opposite direction. Kurt went back to the car, exchanged a few words with Sean, and then the car pulled away. When Kurt caught up to her, he was struggling to stuff his arms into Sean's winter coat. Come on, he said, you're an idiot. I'll walk you home. By the time they reached her place, they were both thoroughly chilled, and he had persuaded her that he wasn't answerable to her for his behavior. She could choose to trust him or not. She chose to accept his rationale, not that he ever explained what he had been doing in the basement, though it was possible he was helping the woman with an assignment or even smoking a joint with her. Nor was that the only time Kurt courted another woman before her eyes. No need, in fact, for him to remove their clothes, since he could make love with lingering glances, witty comments, the slightest touch. He knew the effect he had and how to make a woman fall for him. Ronnie knew this well because he constantly worked his magic on her. Even now, 35 years later, she doesn't entirely trust herself, would never take the risk of seeing him again. Fortunately, he lives far away, so there isn't really any danger. Not that she doesn't fantasize about it and set up the scene, careful to give herself the upper hand. In her fantasy, she's always gorgeous. After all, in her fantasy, she runs regularly and doesn't skip her yoga practice. She's even joined a gym, or had before the pandemic. So she doesn't look her age or suffer the aches and pains of arthritis. After all, it's important that Kurt want her in order to give some spice to her rejection. She knows it would be easy to find him, since she knows the city where he lives, knows which university. Finding him would be no more difficult than making the trip and finding a space in the visitors' parking lot. No doubt his name is in the directory, along with his department and office number. She could take the elevator up to 4th floor, humanities, figure out how the numbering works. Before making her way down the appropriate hallway, she would need to find the ladies' room. With any luck, it wouldn't be one of those places where everything is co-ed. Imagine encountering him as he's just zipping up after having a pee, sharing the same wash basin as they used to do when tidying up after sex. What a laugh that would be. His look of consternation, seeing her like this. And yet, he would probably handle it with the same poise that he handles every other intimate encounter. No, meeting him in his office would definitely be wiser. She looks in the mirror, wonders what he would see. Hair gone grey, longer and thicker because she can't go to the salon during the lockdown. But that would be okay. He always liked her a bit untidy. Eyeliner, pull off her mask and freshen her lipstick. But that would be too obvious. Besides, she can still get away with little or no makeup after all these years. What if he wasn't in his office? Just for a second, she would falter. After all, she doesn't know his teaching schedule. He might be with a student. Ha! She could imagine what kind of session, especially if the student were young and female. But that's not fair. He's always been an original, would never fall into that cliché. There would be another pause at his office door. Perhaps it's ajar, suggesting he's inside or close by. No doubt she would be breathless, heart pounding, would suddenly know it was a very bad idea. At that point, she would begin to walk away without knocking. And that's the truth of it. Even in her imagination, she can't get the upper hand. How ridiculous to imagine she could ever make him suffer. After Kurt came Sean. Yes, the same Sean, but not for long. And then Daniel. Daniel, of course, was quite a different story. If only he hadn't made it too easy for her by caring too much. Because she was suddenly the one with the power to betray him she did. She's ashamed of it now, of course, knows it was her fault. So it seemed that she had lost them both. Kurt, who kept her on tenterhooks and possibly never loved her, and Daniel, who made her face the frightening reality of being needed. When both were gone, she thought for a time she would never love or be loved again. That in fact she didn't deserve it. Not that it stopped her from looking. There were lots of possibilities before, between, and after Kurt and Daniel, and she too learned the art of the convenient exit. Sometimes she has difficulty remembering all the names. Until the rules changed, and she found she wasn't immortal.